Hello all, and welcome to our new energy seminar series. I am Amanda Graham. I am the academic director for the Irving Institute for Energy and Society at Dartmouth, and it is my great pleasure to host us today for our final new energy series talk of the term. We launched the new energy series program last spring. That's not true. Several springs ago, when the pandemic hit. And the purpose of the series is really to ensure that young scholars, so advanced PhD students, postdoctoral fellows, and young faculty have the opportunity to share their work, their emerging work on emerging energy and society and climate challenges. And so we have had several dozen speakers, up to 2,000 attendees from more than 50 countries over the course of the last 2 or 3 years that we've been running this series, with faculty from a couple of dozen at least different universities. And we are very pleased to welcome Viktoriia Grivina to our stage today. And to introduce Viktoriia, I'm delighted to have Professor Laura Ogden from Dartmouth's Anthropology department and also the director of our environmental humanities effort to bring the stage to Viktoriia for her talk today on the cultures of energy efficiency in Kharkiv, Ukraine in the times of war. So we will have a few opening remarks, and then Viktoriia will give her presentation for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience. So please, Laura, take it away.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm really pleased and honored to introduce Viktoriia Grivina, who is a PhD candidate in the School of Modern Languages at the University of St. Andrews. I'll say a little bit about her background, which may help contextualize her talk today. Viktoriia has a master's degree that's a kind of a cultural studies master's degree focused on cultural narratives. In addition, she has extensive experience working with Civil Service International, an international peace organization. In 2020, she joined the project that is called Unarchiving Post-Industry. That is a joint project between the Center of Urban History and the University of St. Andrews. Which is where she began in 2021 to begin her PhD work. Many humanities scholars, including myself, are interested in cities, and that is because cities act in many ways as kind of layered and material archives of really the shifting aspirations of people, of politics, and the ways by which states and state power is asserted and intervenes sometimes in these other processes. In their structures and in their infrastructures, for sure, cities reveal also the incomplete legacies at times of empire, of things like progressive politics, of racial capitalism, particularly in the United States, and so many other things that we're interested in. They are archives of these processes. Now, Viktoriia's work focuses on writing these kind of complex urban histories. And though though I would say right now she's very much focused on writing an urban history in the making, including the devastating Russian invasion of the Ukraine on urban spaces. And so it's this sort of challenge of writing history in the making, I think, and sitting with it that I think she's working through today. So please join me in welcoming Viktoriia and extending our thanks for her talk today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for welcoming me to this wonderful series, and I'm really honored to give my presentation. And before I begin my presentation proper, I just want to reiterate that I come from the background of cultural studies, and social and cultural anthropology is something that is relatively new to me. So I look at this city and I look at the ecology and at the energy efficiency of the urban spaces from a wider cultural perspective, the perspective of Felix Guattari in his three ecologies, in the way that ecological system unites humans and social, human, and non-human mechanical aspect of the built environment. So a little bit about Kharkiv as well before I start. My master's degree was also focused on the city of Kharkiv, which is the second largest city in Ukraine. And here I would also like to place myself and indicate my positionality, because it is also my hometown. Yeah, and hopefully after the anthropological turn, I can shed the guise of scientific impartialness in here. And of course, the city is interesting and exciting for me as a person who experiences the city, and a person who studies the city. Now, what I did in my master's degree, I looked at the aesthetics of street art, and I looked at the conflicts that take place over street art, over erasing street art, over creating street art within urban communities. And I researched how this conflict helped to elucidate and in a way fortify and consolidate various communities and various actors, or as I call them, the voices of the city, and how this in its turn helps to change the policies of the local authorities as to aesthetics, how it highlights the problems. And so when I started my research of the impact of war on aesthetics, and of course Kharkiv is the city that has been heavily damaged, greatly changed only in the past several months. For me, it was something like this unusual and unorthodox state, the state of conflict between local communities, and now the state of wider conflict and war. And even if we think about Bruno Latour's idea of apocalyptic as some liminal event that helps us crystallize and in a way speed up certain processes within the city. And one of the processes that I believe has been greatly impacted by the war itself and by the aesthetics of the war has been the energy efficiency cultures and ecological cultures of the city. So I will start my presentation now. Hopefully I will be able to share my screen. Yes, and start with a little bit of context of what Kharkiv is. So Kharkiv is the second largest city in Ukraine, or used to be, according to the population. Unfortunately now, and I would like to reiterate that I'm not a statistician or a geographer. And today the statistics is such that in the beginning of 2022, around 1,500,000 people resided in the city itself, and 2.7 million resided in the neighboring region. By the summer, the numbers were so different due to the liquid state of the population, liquid state of migrations, because people come and go, that the city council came up with the number of 1 million people who are still residing in Kharkiv, whereas city regional military administration said that there were 700,000 people living in Kharkiv. So already in the population, we can see a big change. And on the one hand, and this is something when I speak about the apocalyptic and the diagnostic function of this term, thinking about war as something that brings changes and shows and highlights changes. And not all the changes are bizarrely, and of course, not all of the changes are negative. There are some pros that of course, are not caused by the war, but are some side effects of the war. And one of them was because the population declined greatly in Kharkiv since February 24. The Kharkiv faces probably less problems with energy security and with electric grids than Kiev, because the stress on the electric grid is less, and because not all of the residential areas will receive central heating. Not all of the residential areas will have electricity and will indeed need electricity, because there are entire districts. For example, if you look to the north of the city, the residential district of Northern Saltivka, which was the closest to the Russian border and was heavily shelled until August, until probably the offensive, the counteroffensive of September. It was virtually erased, and Saltivka was a residential district where around, according to the estimates, around 500,000 people lived. So this area is almost not populated at the moment, and there are several other areas like that, which also, for now, for this winter at least, for the closest perspective, will lessen the burden, the weight on the electric grid. So this is something that is already happening. But speaking about the difference in aesthetics and what war changes, this is the main square of Kharkiv, the Svoboda Square. According to the city mythology, and I'm heavily interested in the urban mythologies, according to Kharkiv mythology, Svoboda Square, Freedom Square, is the largest square in Europe, and it of course is not a factual information, but it is a sense. It is a big sense of pride and vanity, and as you can see, the square has always been a focal point of the city, so many people would gather, and the illumination of the city was something that was always important, and aspect of pride and vanity from the point of view of a resident of the city. Yes, so interestingly, in 2021, and there were already there are communities of enthusiasts, eco enthusiasts, and there are communities of activists who wanted to achieve better energy efficiency before the full-scale invasion, who criticized certain project of the local city council heavily. One of these projects was the Fantasy Park, the latest park of Kharkiv. It is another aspect of the city that local city council, which I would say one of the main actors, of course, within the city, were proud about. And interestingly, their parks were the parks that they undertook to change would often look quite artificial and quite unnatural, although the naturalness or unnaturalness of habitat in the urban areas is in itself an interesting and exciting question. But this new project, this new park that opened in 2021 was called Fantasy Park and was fully dedicated to a variety of illuminations. And you can imagine how much energy that would take. On top of the old Soviet energy systems in the city, whereas most of the residential areas that were built in between 1930s and 1980s, late 1980s, had central heating so that people could not regulate how much heat they wanted to have in their houses. Yeah, and there would often be pictures by these activists of energy efficiency who would show the infrared lights, the heat coming from the open windows in winter. So this will never come back, I'm sure, because this is again the central square with the university, Kharkiv National University, which I also graduated many years ago. And you can see that it is also this very heavily illuminated building. So this is the university as of 11th of September 2022. And of course, because Kharkiv, unlike again some of the cities to the west of the country or Kyiv, Kharkiv has been the frontline city for at least until September. Now the front line shifted a little bit, but the habits of the city to keep the dark regime between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. To not have street lights, to not have even any kind of illumination, and the fact that people also are not allowed to move after 10 p.m. means that some of the restaurants or some of the facilities that used to work until late are now not working during the night. So this kind of culture already started in the beginning of March for Kharkiv, whereas in Kyiv, illumination was reinstalled early in May, and therefore, interestingly, according to a recent, the most recent report, yesterday's report of the Kharkiv mayor Ihor Terechov, it turned out he thanked local citizens for reducing the electricity consumption by 20% in the past 2 weeks. So Kharkivites, in a way, because they spent several months in this regime of blackout during the night, they were more efficient as well in abiding to the rules. Whereas in Kyiv, for example, in Kyiv region, the electricity consumption on the other, vice versa, raised by several percent. Of course, it doesn't mean that Kyiv, the inhabitants of Kyiv started to switch on lights or something like that. It just means that probably some strategic industrial facilities are working in Kyiv, whereas in Kharkiv, most of the industrial facilities are on the energy efficiency regime as well. And this is another aesthetic picture of the central streets of Kharkiv before 2022, and something that local activist communities again criticized city council a lot. So today the same street looks like this, and as you can see, there is only several sources of light. One of them is a currency exchange, which is a small business and probably a private business, and another one is this big thermometer, which is a symbol of the city, one of the symbols of the city, where people used to meet. So this is significant, in a way, iconic place for the city, and the city council, as you can see, decided to have it illuminated still, probably because the narrative of the city council for the past months has been that Kharkiv is the hero city, it's a heroic city that stands despite all odds, and as a symbol, as a reward, this thermometer, this iconic symbol, should be highlighted even in the times of high energy deficiency in the city. And you can see this illuminations are not working now. And on the other hand, there were some I have analyzed interviews with local businesses who some of them keep the illumination even in the when they are specifically told not to. But again, it has to do in many ways with iconicity and with the symbolism, with the meaning of certain places. For example, this is the local Cafe Cristal, one of the oldest cafes, which is situated in the central Shevchenko garden. When interviewed, the employees of this cafe said that they have not spent, that their lights are they have energy efficient bulbs, light bulbs, and that they have a generator, an autonomous generator, and that they are fully conscious of the need to save energy. But at the same time, in April, when the cafe opened again, it was in a way a symbol that the city life is still existent and the city is still sort of alive. So there is a thin line in aesthetics between this feeling of the apocalypse and feeling of needing to gather all the reserves of the space, and at the same time the need to still see that the city is alive, that there is some social, cultural events taking place, and that gives in a way citizens a sense of hope and a sense of aspiration, sort of what will happen after this apocalypse. Maybe things will get better. Another interesting aesthetic, but also energy efficient phenomenon is, of course, the way the city deals with the broken windows. In Kharkiv, according to the city council, more than 150,000 windows were broken due to shellings and missile strikes by Russia. Because the city is the frontline city, only 35 kilometers from Belgorod region, it's still quite easy to send missiles into the city from the nearby region of Belgorod. And because Russian military adapted the missiles C-300 to use rather than air defense as they are designed to be used, to use it as a weapon that endangers the city to indiscriminate shelling, because C-300 are not designed as a weapon of attack, and it doesn't have a very a high level of precision, let's just say. So here on the picture, you can see on the photograph, you can see Dartmouth, one of the iconic building for Kharkiv, is the first skyscraper that was built with fortified concrete in the Soviet Union, and in the times when Kharkiv was for a brief time a capital of Soviet Ukraine. This building was also affected by the attack on the nearby university and zoological garden. You can see that chipboards were used to cover the windows. And interestingly, my first thought when I saw this was to think that this is an ecologically friendly material, which is unusual for post-Soviet, let's just say, spaces to use. But then it turned out that there are three actors who are installing these chipboards, and this is the community services. Who do it on the money of the city council and of the government. Then there are volunteers, an NGO, a volunteer NGO who helps elderly and private housings. And then there are small businesses. And it turned out that all of three of these actors found out that special fortified film does not hold heat. And some other types of materials got wet very fast, and the best material to be used was thus found between the three actors within the city. And this is the windows of the university. As you can see, there is a lot of damage, especially in central areas. So, but that doesn't mean that there is no damage to the residential neighborhoods. And here you can see a private house on the first picture from the 1960s era, then a school which has been shelled. This is in fact my school. And then you can see that the film is used rather than chipboard because this year in the Kharkiv region, school children will have distant learning. So kudos to COVID, which helped us to adapt to this new reality. And because the need in the holding of the heat for the building is not as high, other kinds of materials can be used. And the third is another residential building, but also a children's library, which has a particularly difficult problem. As you can see, people also try to safeguard the windows by using Scotch tape, and even by using the way people are using Scotch tape. So the aesthetics of this use shows us the character of people and individuality, and it was quite interesting to look at the variety of patterns that can be created on the windows. So this is something that also create a certain type of humor and individuality to a variety of districts. And these slabs or oriented chipboard are also decorated often by local street artists. So here on the picture is the representative of community services being helped by the local resident to install these chipboards. But otherwise, the organization Help Save Kharkiv also installs approximately 50 windows per day with the same material. And it is interesting how these three actors, the businesses, NGOs, and local government, divided their responsibilities. So the government installs these chipboards mostly in schools, in shared social common areas, while Help Save Kharkiv helps elderly people mostly who do not have enough funding for that, or who do not know whom to turn to. And then finally, private businesses are mostly contacted by people who left the city, but who know that their windows have been broken, and they would rather pay for the service and have this more secure contractual obligation through money in order to safeguard their housing. And yet they do basically a similar way. And of course, these chipboards are popular even in the cafes. There is a couple of words about, I would just say a couple of words about transportation. So the transportation in the city is free of charge. Mostly hybrid buses are working, which are the buses and trolley buses. So part of the way they can go on electricity, and then part of the way the trolley can be connected to the general electric network. And so it makes the cost of the transportation lower, although of course the city council loses a lot of money on allowing people to use transportation for free. At the moment, I believe that it is important to have this mobility within the city, because it is a matter of life and death often. And the metro has also reduced energy use by, for example, here they're using only certain lights out of many, and the escalators stopped working. And from the next week, there will be power outages in the residential area, but the metro will still work because it is one of probably one of the most important transportation and infrastructural facilities, as you can see that in April and until late May, it was also used as a place to hide. And here I found it interesting how people even living in the metro continue their lifestyle, and the importance of being energy efficient, but also having this certain lifestyles and habits, like growing something on your windowsill, and then having your TV and microwave. So there is this thin and interesting balance between that. And of course, some monuments have been covered. It is not directly connected to energy efficiency, but I believe that this feeling of walking the street where the monuments are secured gives local citizens a feeling that they are living in this hard apocalyptic times, and in a way it reminds you of the need to survive this, but also of the temporary nature of it, because of course if this monument is being preserved, then it means that for local community, for local volunteers, believe that there will be a certain future. So on the other hand, some things, like for example this square of architects, where models of famous buildings of the city are still standing covered in glass, which interestingly not many houses around have preserved. It reminds you of the fragility of peace and fragility of the past and of the future, and in the way the aesthetics of the city gives you a lot. And probably the last things that I wanted to say, that street art has been also part of city urban community before the large-scale invasion. It could be seen as a humorous hints at the lack of modernization of certain systems, as you can see on the first picture with Malevich square. And the second is the reminiscent, reminder that the war is still going on, and here a place where a missile stroke was covered in paint by a local street artist, and the artist asks, why do we need this flower? And this is of course to remind, and in a way to aestheticize these times that the city is going through. And of course, looking forward, urban infrastructure of Kharkiv had a lot of problems even before the full-scale invasion, and some problems did not disappear. There are still conflicts between local urbanist communities and city council over the destruction of the tram lines in certain spaces. And I believe that this will be a part of a larger dialogue and larger community contract with and agreement or disagreement with the city council after the war. But the fact that there are still these struggles and there are still these arguments over whether the tramline should remain or should not remain, it shows that local community is it has more hope for the future than fear. And with this positive note, and with this emblem of Kharkiv as the city of steel and concrete, or of the first steel and concrete building, hopefully it will stand as strong as this iconic building, Держпром. I would like to thank you, and I will stop my presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to give a little clap. You know, it's an awkward Zoom clap I just did. I'm going to moderate the questions, and I'm looking forward to that. So if you have questions, you could put them in the question and answer part of Zoom. But if you don't mind, I'll just start because I have so many I loved, and I just want to thank you for the wonderful talk that you gave. What I was really struck by, Viktoriia, is this the way by which you really show how energy systems are not just a kind of mode of infrastructure, but also sorts of habits that have cultural meaning to them and an aesthetic and related aesthetics, and the ways by which war reconfigures those habits and their associated meanings. And so I kind of wanted to follow up on that a little bit. And one is this, I was wondering about, I was really struck by those images of the dark city. And I was wondering about how, not just in the context of war, but overlaid with the context of war, how living in a dark city feels from your interlocutors in terms of safety, and to whom. Like, as a woman, I thought, wow, this is really a different space, probably for women than others, but I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. If placing in a context, in the 1990s, the economic situation of Ukraine was such that power outages were for several years a matter of habit. And I uh, I remember some of my interlocutors remembered that walking the dark alleys was especially trying for females. And so when the city council came, I think one of the reasons why they wanted to light all of the streets was to contrast these new times to these times of trial and economic deficiency in a way. So this pride in illumination and this use of energy, electricity, often surplus electricity, was this trauma of the times when the lack of power, the lack of electricity was equated to economic hardship for everyday users as well. So today, I think that the new generation of the city dwellers, people who are under 25, for example, those who never saw the power outages of the 1990s, feel that it is rather romantic and interesting sometimes, especially, of course, it depends on where you live. If they live in the central areas, which a lot of young intellectuals prefer to live, of course, there is a wonderful photo series by Pavlo Dorogoy, who is a photographer who remained in Kharkiv throughout the full-scale invasion. And he shows how you can see the stars in the center of the city. And he creates this exaggeratingly romanticized pictures of the stars and saying, oh, well, our city can look like this, and it's beautiful and it's natural and so on. I think that in the future, there should be some compromise, because there will be still people for whom the lack of electricity will now associate with war as well. So it will be interesting to see how this will work out.
Yeah, so the darkness has this kind of historical ripple effect for some people and for others not. And so because of that, the meanings are really different. I also, I was also struck by the darkness, and you started the talk talking about Guattari's three ecologies, and it made me think, like, you have this depopulated city. There's so much going on. There's darkness at night. How has this city also transformed the kind of non-human ecology, and how is that shaping people's sense of what it's like to be living there?
Yeah, well, it shaped the animal sort of life. The animal ecology in the city changed a lot, because many of these deserted districts have dogs teeming the streets, stray dogs. Although there are a lot of pictures and articles about how Ukrainians take care of the pets, There are just too many pets, and this is a problem. Another problem was in the beginning of March. Oh, one person noted that they did not see pigeons anymore, and it most likely happened because pigeons died because the people who used to feed them left. And so there was this, and then there is an interesting problem that was connected to the broken windows, because especially in the central part, between the broken windows, bats live. And I remember studying at the university, sometimes a bat would wake up and start beating between these windows panes, and us as modern languages students, we were shocked and horrified and screamed. But then the biologists came and said, "Oh, you are my darling. This is a precious, precious kid. We will take him," and so on. So there are activists who are trying to help bats, and the bat population was reduced because it was winter, and of course they were still sleeping, and the broken windows caused cold. And so there was this ripple effect. But on the other hand, some people who returned to their apartments in August found bats living in their apartments due to the broken windows. And there is an interesting displacement of animals, and I think that animals also feel the changes, because they tend to come out to people more. They tend to do some irrational things. For example, recently the orangutan escaped city zoo, and he was convinced to go back on the bicycle of the lady who was his keeper. But then we thought that this story was very funny and stuff, but it turned out that he was the refugee himself, displaced from another zoo outside of the city, which was heavily shelled. So here we can see this refugee animals and refugee humans and even plants sometimes. And I don't know how the city will take this challenge going further.
Yeah, this kind of feral landscape that's a part of this kind of apocalyptic landscape that you're describing. There's a couple questions in the questions answer, and the first one, and I'm not sure if this is something you can answer or not, is about solar energy, and that that there's a sense that solar power is popular in the Ukraine because of so much sunlight, and whether or not that has been disrupted by the war, and in what ways, and if NGOs are handing out solar type chargers.
Yes, well, today I think all the NGOs and volunteers direct their efforts to help the military, because the military liberate the areas and help to raise the economy and all other questions. So the most of the solar energy and power stations and generators go either to the military or to the doctors or to the first responders. So this is the way. I'm not a specialist in any way, but as far as I have heard from our Prime Minister recently, around 30% of all the energy in 2021 was produced by solar energy in Ukraine, and it was a rapidly growing business. Also, it was a private business, so solar panels were installed for private houses, but also for private businesses. And that has been largely destroyed, because our climate is divided between the north and south, and the south is unfortunately still largely occupied, and most of the infrastructure was destroyed. But I heard from I think a person from the ministry, I believe, of our energy. During our talk with the Center for Energy Ethics, he mentioned that there was an instance when the entire community lived during heavy shellings only on solar energy in the Kherson region. So that is definitely a future, and that is definitely something that we will be able to reinstall. I know that a lot of solar panels were destroyed in Kharkiv region as well. In in winter, it probably will not be a solution, but for the summer, I think a lot of people are thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Someone asked if there are other cultural studies scholars working on the issues of energy and particularly the intersection of energy with the meaning, kind of cultural meanings in the context of war. Are you aware of that?
I know cultural workers who work with the war and in a larger frame with the war that started in 2014. Not so much energy systems, but Dr. Donovan, my supervisor, has been working with the Donbass and with the cultures of industry and with the history of industries. It's extremely exciting with the connection between Ukraine and European heritage of Donbass. And then Dr. Daria Cymbaluk, who has recently become a PhD, received her PhD at St. Andrews, has been working with the notion of displacement and plant life and the kind of plants that people take and the kind of plant heritage of the war. So that I know, but I will sure look into this, and you can contact me later, and I will provide.
It's too. I mean, it's too. It's probably too early to tell, right? Because so much of people's attachments in the moments of like this are beyond their thinking mind, right? So much in their other kinds of minds and places, and so which is part of that second question is like, how does one perhaps how do you kind of navigate this emotional burden of really of studying a place that you love and know and is who you are in this context, studying energy and other things?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, and I think there have been a lot of debates, at least within my cultural circle of academics, about the expertise and emotions, and there has been, at least within Ukrainian academic community, a problem that of objectification of Ukrainians as, okay, we are the victims of war, so we probably cannot we cannot be experts in the field. But I believe that after anthropological turn, the idea of impartial knowledge and idea of a scholar who lives in the white sort of his perfect world and perfectly sterile is no longer valid, and we all have our own positionalities. We are all partial to some extent, and I think that Ukrainians are placed very well in terms that we know the situation from the inside, and for many years, at least within Eastern European scholarship, the focus would be largely on Russia. So Ukrainian scholarships and Ukrainian expertise was in many ways overlooked. And it is a great pleasure to see that there is interest in Ukrainian sort of research and academia and renewed interest in the culture, in studies on Ukraine. And I encourage everyone who wants to study Ukraine, because I think that it is an exciting country. It is extremely, of course, precarious conditions now for the country, but I believe it has great interesting potential and interesting history, culture, literature. There is a lot to study there.
You've sold me, Viktoriia. I have this related question. April asks, and maybe I can add on to that a sort of related question, is that are there, you mentioned earlier these issues of kind of these past energy vulnerabilities, and my sense would be that this was a very different infrastructure at the time of the, prior to the last couple of decades. So, but is there anything to have learned from that kind of instability that is being brought to today? And I have a little second follow-up question, because I was in Norway right before your talk for a month. And one of the real key political debates that are going on in Norway right now is around their moral obligation around questions of energy in the context of energy instability that the war is creating. And so the second part of this question about lessons or whatever is, for me, is what kind of discussions are people having in the Ukraine about the international community's moral obligations around energy right now in the context of war?
Yeah, well, for sure, Ukraine, thinking about history, during the Soviet times, at least between 1930s and 1980s, Ukraine was a supplier of energy for a large part of the Soviet Union. And that is why our power grid is now not destroyed by the amount of missiles, because the energy grid of Ukraine was built and created to cater for half of the Soviet Union. And therefore we have quite a strong and good power grid. And of course, 30% of it is now damaged, but damage doesn't mean destroyed. And there are different options. And of course, Ukraine, before the beginning of the missile attacks on the energy infrastructure, Ukraine continued to export energy for European Union, which helped European Union, of course, to be more energy sufficient. So unfortunately, Ukraine was also a place where coal was being mined and sold and exported to Europe by the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union used the systems of Ukraine and depleted its resources in a way before the resources of Siberia were discovered. So of course there is this nostalgia for having these resources and the industry and so on. But at the same time, well, I think that Ukrainian society, all in all, has grown up quite a bit. So we are relying on ourselves more than on the world, although the world is helping a lot. But I think it is exactly because Ukrainians are now used to rely on themselves that the international community is seeing that Ukrainian society in prospect is self-sufficient and can find solutions themselves, that it is probably easier to help, and sort of this new reality comes where there is this question of solidarity rather than obligation. And hopefully that will be cultivated further on. But of course, Ukrainians are hoping that all the ties with Russia will be cut energy-wise, because we know that this money does not go to help Russian citizens and build Russian infrastructures. It is spent on missiles and on more weapons that is used against Ukraine. At the moment, at least, unfortunately, I think this is the main request within Ukrainian community.
That's a really great way, I think, for us to sort of sum in some ways this discussion about energy, in this sense of thinking about energy and the energy grid as this international space of possibility, of support rather than obligation in this case. So thank you for that. Shall we turn it over to Amanda for a last couple of words? And I just wanted to thank you again. I so enjoyed what I learned today.
Yeah, I enjoy your questions a lot, and thank you for hosting me.
Laura and Viktoriia, I feel as though we at the Irving Institute are absolutely indebted to you both for this conversation that fully reinforces, right, the mission of a place that's focused on energy and society. Energy is not simply a technical challenge. It is so very human and so very social, and in a whole complex of ways. And Viktoriia, your work to extract those learnings and lessons from a time of incredible and deep conflict is incredibly poignant, but it's also incredibly inspiring and powerful. And so my really deep thanks to you both for leading us on this journey, this incredibly important journey today. And Viktoriia, we are 100% in your corner. So as your work continues to evolve, we will be watching, and we would be very interested in helping to continue to engage these kinds of threads in conversation. I am humbled and thrilled with today's episode of the new energy series. And I want to point everyone's attention to the next phase of this set of conversations with young and emerging scholars, of which Viktoriia is a prominent example. We'll be back in January 25th, with our very own Christopher Callahan, who is completing his work as a postdoc in our climate modeling group here at Dartmouth. And then in February, we have another colleague from the University of St. Andrews, Sean Field, who participated in our New Energy Summit last June and brought a perspective that's very distinctive from looking at and speaking with businesses from an anthropological perspective in terms of their role in the energy space. True to form, we then continue with two additional institutions, Emily Pektigian from Penn State and Vivek Shastri from UT Austin. So mark your calendars now. Please come back and join us for those talks during our winter term. And with that, a big thanks to the Irving Institute team for making this happen, to Laura and to Viktoriia for their wonderful conversation, and to all, be well. Thank you for joining us.